Welcome back to Dr. Supercoach YouTube for Pigs Round 11 Captaincy Recommendations. This is the last week of our best 22 for a while before we get stuck into these mid-season buys. And also just want to say thanks for your patience. I know this one's dropping on Thursday as opposed to the normal Wednesday, but I don't know if you saw in the news there was a train in Sydney. I don't know why I'm laughing, it's not that funny. There's a train in Sydney that got caught up and tangled with the overhead wires and pretty much shut down all the trains in Sydney. And I was in Sydney for work, and I got stuck there overnight and had to get a hotel and couldn't get home. So that was a bit crap, but that's why it's late. I'm home now, recording now, so let's get into it. There were some great captaincy scores out there last weekend, and I was able to get onto that Tristan Cherry 150, saving my VC until the Sunday as I discussed with you last week. And I was obviously really comfortable saving my VC till Sunday to get onto that Cherry 150, and obviously took that. Now onto this week. Once again, St Kilda play on the Sunday afternoon, so that's awesome because Harry Boyd is here again as our loop. Although, to be honest, we might not need him this week. I feel like we've got plenty of loops with this carnage going on. It's just funny watching everyone freak out about Harry Boyd being potentially a late in when he just has never been a late in at all this year. It hasn't happened. But the people freaking out is quite funny. So last week I quite liked giving you 10 options as opposed to the normal 9 I do, so I might give that another crack this week. So let's get stuck into it. Number 3 VC is Bailey Smith. I've actually considered recommending Bailey in each of the 2 last weekends, but despite I didn't do that because he had matchups with GWS and Port, who are both really restrictive matchups. So I thought about recommending him, just didn't do it because of those matchups. But despite those difficult matchups, he scored 154 and 156 in the last fortnight. Now, this week is another tough matchup. It's actually the hardest matchup there is. The Bulldogs are the hardest team this season for inside midfielders and the second toughest matchup for wingmen. So this is not a recommendation based on an easy opponent. Nevertheless, Baslenka's form warrants a spot in this video given the nature of this matchup that could get spicy. A game against the Bulldogs, the team he left in the off-season, and he's already stirred the pot with this year, ragging on the fact that he doesn't have to play at Ballarat anymore. And then, if you remember, the Bont responded, saying he's happy to know that they're still living rent-free in Bailey Smith's head. So this could be a rivalry game for the ages. They're both kind of having jabs at each other. I know Baz will come into this one with some fire. He's averaging 136 at GMHBA this season. And I wouldn't be surprised for him to come out swinging in this one and give us another great score, even given the tough opponent. Number 2 VC option is Zack Merritt. Zack had a giant 172 only 3 weeks ago, but then since then he's gone 76 and 65 in 2 stinkers. He was tagged in the first one, and the Bombers were completely and utterly destroyed in the second last week against the Bulldogs. And they have copped it from the media this week. That was a disgraceful game. And the one thing we know about Zack is that he is a very proud captain. I've targeted him as a captain before, after a horrible Bombers performance, as he's someone that can put the team on his back and will them to the win. And when he does that, those performances usually lead to big Supercoach scores for him. And he's got the perfect matchup to do that this week. Dream time at the G against the Tigers. Massive crowd, massive media attention on this one. He's got to step up. Essendon have got to step up. Zack has scores of 119 and 162 against the Tigers in his last 2 meetings. The Tigers, who we know are a positive matchup for inside midfielders this year, interestingly enough, Richmond haven't been giving up the big scores of late, but I think that's more of a function that they have played teams without these elite primo mids to beat up on. And beating up on them is exactly what I expect Essendon and Zack Merritt to do if they want to be taken seriously again. And then number 1, VC option, Marcus Bontempelli, if you own him. I just spoke about the Bailey Smith vs Bulldogs grudge match this week, and the Bont hasn't been quiet about it either. In fact, he's stoked the flames at times. And given that he is the captain of the club and is arguably the best player in the league, I think this is a game he's going to want to put his foot down. Averaging 133 this season from his 5 games, the Bont has already given us some spike scores of a 159, a 141 and a 140 to begin his campaign. Now, Geelong are also a tough matchup for inside mids over the last 10 games, so like Baz, This isn't a recommendation based on an ease of matchup, but one based on the fact that this is the best player in Supercoach, playing on a Thursday night in a grudge match against an old teammate who has been talking shit about his team. Bring it on. Pod captain, let's go. My pod option this week is Nick Martin. Nick is someone with a big Supercoach ceiling, already showing us 2 145s this year. And this week he gets a matchup with Richmond, who are easily the best team for defenders and designated kickers to play against. They just give up so many points. And no, I don't care that Martin lines up in the forward line, because he's got a license to roam wherever he wants, and his heat map shows him spending a big portion of the game pushing back into defence and racking up disposals. So the Tigers have recently given up scores of 126 to Ryan Merritt, 142 to Josh Battle, 132 to Jake Bowie. So if those guys can have these out-of-the-box spike scores, what's Nick Martin going to do to them? Remember when I recommended Jack Sinclair as my pod C earlier in the year against the Tigers? That was his season high 162. And Nick Martin is a similar type of player, and while he doesn't take as many kick-ins as Sinclair, I really expect Nick to have the freedom to roam and rack up the pill just like Jack did. So this could be a big one. Now onto my top 6 captain recommendations. Like I said, I'm giving you 10 in general in the video, not my normal 9. And to be honest, these 6 captains, I really struggle to put an order to them. I think they all could be really good, but there's also a bit of risk attached with quite a few of them. Some of these guys are guys that are capable of ceiling scores, but they're also capable of some averageness. So I struggle to rank them, but these are guys that if you own, they have a great matchup, and I think they really could pop. So number 6 is Luke Jackson. But obviously this recommendation hinges on Sean Darcy not playing, which I don't know at the time of recording. So if LJ is solo ruck, we know how dominant he can be. Scores of 111 and 143 in his last 2 games, and now a matchup with Port Adelaide. And again, this recommendation hinges on him being up against Dante Vizentini, who has just given up a ton to Riley O'Brien and a big 128 to Mark Blitzarves last week. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this recommendation because it really depends on team announcements, and this could all be redundant in a few hours. But if you own Luke Jackson and you see that he is solo ruck and you see that he is coming up against Dante Vizentini, I think you should be licking your lips and highly considering him as a captaincy option this week. Now, speaking of guys with a high floor and a low ceiling, no, the other way around, a high ceiling and a low floor, Jordan Dawson, let me reel off his last 4 scores. 76, 156, 78, 132, So 2 bad scores and 2 great scores. A 5-round average of 111 is great for Dawson, that's what he does, but we know it comes with roller coaster scoring. This weekend is hopefully one of the spike scores in that roller coaster. A date with West Coast at Adelaide Oval. The last time he played West Coast at Adelaide Oval, he put out a 158. That was last year, where he popped that massive score in amongst some really average run. I remember that vividly because he was very bad. Everyone was trading him out. And then he just got this West Coast matchup and out of the box went boom and just kind of doubled what he'd been doing. So that shows that even when not in form, he can beat up on the Eagles. And this year he is actually in great form. He's right up there in the Brownlow race and he's playing a really great role. His fantasy stats are through the roof. It's just his kicking efficiency is kind of limiting him or giving him these roller coaster scores for Supercoach. West Coast are the second easiest matchup inside midfielders, and this is looking like a great opportunity for Dawson to stamp his authority, earn another 3 Brownlow votes, and give his owners a big Supercoach score. Now, number 4, Nick Dacos. Nick has a 3-round average of 87. That is bad. He's been tagged in at least 2 of the last 3 games, and he's not handled it well. These niggles keep conveniently popping up to give him an excuse during that time as well. Whether he's actually injured, we don't know, but he plays on it a bit, I think. But fear not, Nick Dacos owners. This could be a game that makes it all up to you. A game against the Kangaroos, who have actually become the easiest matchup for inside midfielders this year. Taranto and Ross both went 110 on them last week, and prior to that we've seen a Dunkley 139, a Merritt 172, a Butters 162, and George Hewitt 171. North Melbourne have tagged with Will Phillips in previous years, but we haven't really seen that this year. There's always a chance they send someone to Dacos, but North haven't really shown a tagging inclination this season. So if Nick is allowed to run free again this week, this could be a big one, and even his high break even may be in danger. Now, those three were guys I gave you that I think have a bit of high variance. They could be really big, they could be really average. Now I've got three much safer ones for you. Max Gawn. He is still dominating the Supercoach landscape this season, averaging over 130 in 2025. That's huge. This week he gets a matchup with his long-time Supercoach rival in Brodie Grundy. But Grundy is just a shell of his old self, no longer the dominating force that he once was. And opposing ruckmen have taken advantage of that, with him being the sixth easiest matchup for rucks this season. We've seen some decent scores from lesser ruckmen against Grundy this season, like recently Cameron's done a 119, Witts has done a 125, and even Goldstein did a 115. Now, what will Big Max do against his old sparring buddy? I don't see a reason why he can't continue his 130 average this week. Number 2 is Zack Butters. Zack copped a 53 score last week. Gross. That was a real outlier, giving his 132 season average up until that game. And I'm expecting a big bounce back this week against a Fremantle midfield that have been giving up some big scores this year. They've been giving up some big scores, especially since Hayden Young went down and they lost their big defensive midfielder. In fact, the Dockers are the third easiest matchup for inside mids this season. Remember, they recently gave up that 171 to Jack Crisp and the 160 to Jack McRae just before that. Now, Tom Green didn't really take advantage last week like I thought he would, but Finn Callaghan put up a good score, especially when you take into account the fact that he spent a fair amount of time on the bench with a dislocated shoulder. So he was still able to do pretty well if you take that into account. So I'm expecting a Butters bounce back in this game. And, with no Jason Horne-Francis, maybe he has to do a bit more midfield time as well. So from one of the best midfielders in the comp against a team that has been leaking points, I think he's going to make it up to you this week, Zack Butters owners. But my number one captain option is Tristan Cherry. Just until he gives me a reason not to, he just has to stay here. Tristan has overtaken Max Gawn this week as the highest Supercoach scorer in 2025, and I just don't see him slowing down anytime soon. A 3-round average of 161, let that sink in. That is monstrous. That came from scores of 146, 186, 150. And this week he goes head-to-head with Darcy Cameron, who's actually the fifth easiest matchup for ruckman over the course of this season. Even some of the lesser guys like Brodie Grundy and Riley O'Brien have scores of 119 and 122 in recent weeks against Darcy Cameron. Now for Tristan, he's averaged exactly 10 tackles over the last 2 games. And he's complementing that with 19 disposals and a huge volume of hitouts. This is a recipe for Supercoach stardom. And we've seen that Cherry in recent weeks, and I think there's a very good chance we see it again this week. So until he gives me a reason not to recommend him, we've just got to go there. So they're my favourite 10 captain options of the week. But as always, here's a bunch of names that didn't quite make the cut. I think they're going to have good weeks and you could roll with any of them, especially for draft. Some of them actually have good enough matchups that you probably still could go there in classic. So Bailey Dale, very stiff not to get in here. He just, I had to talk about Baz and Bont. But the Cats are actually a really good matchup for defenders, so Dale should be good here. I really like Nankervis's matchup against Goldie. I think he should do well. Isaac Rankin is actually probably the stiffest one here. He probably should have made the 10. I just wasn't sure who to take out for him. When I spoke about Dawson, I spoke about how easy their matchup is, but Rankin actually, does he feel safer than Dawson? Maybe he does. Maybe Dawson's the guy with the high ceiling, low floor, and Rankin's the safe one. Maybe I should go there. Anyway, Riley O'Brien as well. West Coast Rucks are just bleeding points, so Rob should do well in draft. And then in that same matchup, Rory Laird or Mitch Hinge running off half-back, they should do well. In the same game, Ryan Marrick, Adelaide have been giving up some points to designated kickers, so he's an option. Jake Bowie in his matchup with Sydney. Sydney are giving up plenty of points to defenders, so Bowie's an option. And then at the other side of the ground, Matt Roberts as well, because Melbourne have been giving up some points, so Roberts and Bowie should do well. And then in this last game of the round, I actually think there's going to be some pretty good scores from probably less classic relevant people. So I think John Noble should score really well against St Kilda. Maybe Rioli too. The mids, I think St Kilda are going to struggle in the midfield without Jack McRae. So can Noah Anderson or Matt Rao take advantage? They probably can. Then Jack Steele, I think he's really going to have to lift and shoulder load without McRae, and Gold Coast are pretty good for mids, so there's an option. And then Jared Whitsey as well. I think bringing it home against Rowan Marshall, I think he should do really well. So there's my 10 options, and then there's a bunch more that I think are still going to be good, can be used for drafts. So thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, turn your notifications on so you don't miss this video weekly, and good luck.